Some mistakes follow you no matter how far into the wilderness you run. Tom Baird has been carrying the weight of losing his daughter for 20 long years. The old mountain man thought he'd found peace in the Montana Territory, living alone with just his traps and his regrets. Then a German shepherd appeared on his trail, whimpering over a worn leather bag. Inside that bag, Tom found something that stopped his heart cold, a locket with his daughter's face. The dog wouldn't leave his side, like it was waiting for something. Now Tom has to face the hardest trail of his life, following clues that might lead him back to the family he lost. What if she doesn't want to be found? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the pine needles like old memories, refusing to let go. Tom Baird stood on the rough-hewn porch of his cabin, coffee steaming in his weathered hands, watching the sun paint gold across the Montana peaks. 20 years he'd called this place home, though home was a word that sat uneasily in his chest. More like a hideout, if he was being honest with himself. The German shepherd lay stretched across the cabin's threshold, those intelligent brown eyes fixed on Tom's every movement. 3 days had passed since the animal had led him to that cursed bag, and still the dog refused to leave. Tom had tried shooing him away, even walked a full mile down the mountain trail, hoping the creature would stay behind. But each time he turned around, there was the dog, padding silently through the underbrush like a four-legged conscience. "Don't know what you're waiting for, boy," Tom muttered, taking another sip of the bitter coffee. "Ain't nothing here worth staying for." The cabin reflected its owner's state of mind, functional but hollow. One room served all purposes: sleeping, cooking, eating, and the long winter evenings when a man had nothing but his thoughts for company. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel bare, save for a single item Tom hadn't been able to bring himself to put away or throw out. A hand-carved wooden cross, no bigger than his palm, sat there gathering dust. Sarah had made it for him during their first winter as newlyweds, her small fingers patient with the knife work, her face glowing with the kind of love that makes a man believe he can conquer the world. Tom's routine had become as predictable as the seasons. Wake before dawn, check his traps along the creek, skin whatever unfortunate creatures had wandered into his snares, cure the hides, and trade them once a month to old Pete Henley, who made the journey up from the valley settlement. Pete was the closest thing Tom had to human contact, and even that was measured in grunts and nods rather than actual conversation. But routines were good. Routines kept a man from thinking too hard about what he'd left behind, what he'd lost, what he'd thrown away with his own stubborn pride. The German shepherd lifted his head, ears pricked toward the distant sound of hoofbeats on the rocky trail. Tom recognized the irregular rhythm, Pete's old mare favoring her left front hoof, right on schedule. "Pete's coming," Tom told the dog, who seemed to understand more than most humans Tom had known. "Maybe he can take you back down to civilization where you belong." Pete Henley appeared around the bend in the trail, his grizzled face split by the kind of grin that came from a man who'd found humor in life's hardships. Approaching 70, Pete had the kind of constitution that seemed carved from the very mountains themselves. His mare picked her way carefully up the steep path, loaded down with supplies and mail that occasionally found its way to the remote corners of the territory. "Morning, Tom," Pete called out, dismounting with the careful movements of a man who'd learned to respect his aging joints. His eyes immediately found the German shepherd. "Well, I'll be. Where'd you find yourself a friend?" "Didn't find him. He found me." Tom set his coffee cup on the porch railing. "Been trying to get rid of him for 3 days now." Pete approached the dog slowly, extending his hand. The German shepherd sniffed politely but remained in position as if he'd been assigned to guard duty. "Fine-looking animal. Somebody's missing him, I'd wager. Don't see many dogs like this wandering wild in the mountains." "That's what I figured." "Tom, descended the porch steps. "You seen anyone down in Millerton asking about a lost dog?" "Can't say I have, but then again, I don't spend much time listening to gossip." Pete reached into his saddlebags and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Speaking of which, got your usual supplies. Coffee, salt, some of that salted pork you favor. And something else." Tom accepted the bundle, feeling its familiar weight. But Pete's expression had shifted, become more serious. "Tom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think careful before you answer." Something in the old man's tone made Tom's stomach tighten. "What's that? You ever hear the name Catherine Walsh?" The world seemed to tilt beneath Tom's feet. Catherine. Katie. His little girl who'd been 5 years old the last time he'd held her, who'd called him Papa and believed he could fix anything broken in the world. Tom gripped the porch railing to steady himself. "Why?" The word came out rougher than he intended. Pete studied Tom's face with the shrewd eyes of a man who'd spent decades reading people. "Woman came through Millerton about a week ago, traveling with a young boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old. She was asking questions about folks who might have lived in these parts 20-25 years back. Mentioned that name specifically." "What she looked like?" Tom's mouth had gone dry. Brown hair, green eyes, pretty woman, but worn down by something. The boy favored her considerably. Pete paused. "Tom, she was asking about a man named Thomas Baird. Said he might be her father." The words hit Tom like a physical blow. Katie was looking for him. After all these years, after all the silence, she was trying to find him. The coffee cup slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the wooden planks. The German shepherd rose to his feet, moving to stand beside Tom as if sensing his distress. Those brown eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human, and for the first time Tom wondered if this dog's appearance in his life wasn't as random as he'd assumed. "Did you—" Tom had to clear his throat and start again. "Did you tell her anything?" "Told her I'd ask around. Didn't seem right to give out a man's location without his say-so." Pete's voice carried the weight of unspoken understanding. "But Tom, if that's your daughter down there, she looked like she's been carrying some heavy burdens. Whatever happened between you two, maybe it's time to think about making it right." Tom stared out at the mountains, those ancient peaks that had witnessed countless human struggles across the centuries. For 20 years, they'd been his refuge, his fortress against the pain of loss. But now, the walls felt like a prison. "How long ago did you say she came through?" "Week, maybe 10 days. She was staying at the boarding house in Millerton, but I don't know if she's still there." The German shepherd nudged Tom's hand with his wet nose, a gentle reminder of his presence. Tom looked down at the animal, really seeing him for the first time. The dog's coat was well maintained despite his obvious time in the wilderness. His collar, though worn, showed signs of quality leatherwork. This wasn't a stray. This was someone's beloved companion, and he'd led Tom to that bag for a reason. "Pete, you ever see this dog before? Down in the settlement or anywhere else?" The older man studied the German shepherd more carefully. "Come to think of it, there's something familiar about him. Can't quite place it, though." He scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Tell you what, why don't you come down to Millerton with me today? If your daughter's still there, seems like you ought to know about it." Tom's first instinct was to refuse. Millerton meant people, questions, the kind of attention he'd spent 20 years avoiding. But the leather bag sat inside his cabin, holding secrets that demanded answers. And Katie, his little Katie, was out there somewhere, looking for a father who'd let his pride destroy their family. "I need to think on it," Tom said finally. "Think fast," Pete advised, preparing to remount his mare. "Woman like that, traveling with a child, won't stay in one place long if she's got troubles following her. And Tom," he paused with one foot in the stirrup, "whatever mistakes you made in the past, that boy down there deserves to know his grandfather. Don't let pride cost you twice." As Pete rode away, Tom remained on the porch, the German shepherd a warm presence beside him. The morning sun had burned away most of the mist, revealing the stark beauty of the wilderness that had been both sanctuary and exile. But for the first time in 20 years, Tom found himself looking beyond the mountains, wondering what lay waiting in the world he'd left behind. The wooden cross on the mantel seemed to catch the light, reminding him of faith he'd abandoned along with everything else precious in his life. Sarah would have told him to go, would have said forgiveness was worth any risk. But Sarah was buried in a churchyard he'd never had the courage to visit, and their daughter was a grown woman he wouldn't recognize if he passed her on the street. The German shepherd whined softly, a sound full of encouragement and understanding. Tom reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears, feeling the warm fur beneath his calloused fingers. "You know something about all this, don't you, boy?" Tom said quietly. "Question is, are you here to help me find what I lost, or to make sure I don't run away from it again?" The dog's tail wagged once, a gentle affirmation that somehow made Tom's decision easier. He had supplies to gather, preparations to make. For the first time in 20 years, Tom Baird was going to venture down from his mountain sanctuary. He was going to face the ghosts he'd been running from and pray that it wasn't too late for an old man to make amends with the family he'd never stopped loving. The mountains would be here when he returned. But his daughter might not wait forever. The leather bag sat on Tom's rough wooden table like an accusation. He'd avoided opening it properly since that first glimpse of Katie's locket, but Pete's news had changed everything. With trembling hands that had once been steady enough to thread a needle or aim a rifle, Tom untied the worn leather strings that held the bag closed. The German shepherd positioned himself at Tom's feet, as if understanding the gravity of what was about to unfold. Those intelligent eyes never left Tom's face, watching for every flicker of emotion as the contents spilled across the scarred wood surface. The cavalry insignia came out first, tarnished brass that caught the cabin's dim light. Tom recognized it immediately as belonging to the 7th Cavalry, though this particular piece bore markings he didn't remember from his own service years. Beneath it lay a collection of items that made his breath catch. A small bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon, the locket he'd already seen, and something that made his heart skip, a tintype photograph of Sarah holding baby Katie. But it was the letters that drew his attention. The ribbon had been Sarah's favorite color, and he remembered her wearing a dress that exact shade on their wedding day. With hands that shook despite his efforts to control them, Tom untied the bundle and spread the letters on the table. The first envelope bore Sarah's careful handwriting. "For Katie, when she's old enough to understand." The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. Tom's throat constricted as he recognized his late wife's flowing script, words written in her final months when consumption had weakened her body but left her mind sharp as ever. "My dearest Katie," the first letter began. "If you're reading this, then I'm no longer with you, and your father has likely told you about the terrible argument that drove our family apart. But there are things he doesn't know, secrets I kept to protect him from even more pain." Tom's hands began to shake as he continued reading. Sarah wrote of her illness, how she'd hidden its severity from him for months, fearing he would abandon his cavalry duties to care for her. She'd made him promise to finish his enlistment, never telling him that she knew she wouldn't live to see his return. Your father blamed himself for not being here when I passed, Sarah's letter continued. He thought his duty to the army mattered more than his duty to us. But Katie, I made him go. I made him promise to serve his country because I believed he would come back to us whole and proud, not broken by watching me waste away. The German shepherd whined softly, pressing closer to Tom's leg as if sensing his distress. Tom's vision blurred as tears he'd held back for 20 years finally found their way free. Sarah had died, believing he would return to raise their daughter. Instead, he'd come home to find her buried, and Katie living with Sarah's sister, who'd made it clear that Tom's absence during his wife's final illness made him unfit to be a father. The second letter revealed even more painful truths. Sarah had written to Katie about the inheritance land that had belonged to Sarah's family for 3 generations, property that should have passed to Katie when she came of age. But in his grief and guilt, Tom had signed away his rights to that land, giving Katie's aunt complete control over the child's future. "I've hidden the deed in a place only you will think to look," Sarah had written. "Behind the loose stone in our old fireplace, where I used to hide your birthday presents. Your father never knew about the inheritance because I wanted to surprise him when he returned. That land is your birthright, Katie. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Tom's chest tightened as memories flooded back. The fireplace in their old cabin, torn down years ago. Sarah's mysterious smiles when she thought he wasn't looking. The way she'd insisted on certain stones being placed just so when they'd built that chimney together during their first winter as husband and wife. The third letter was the most devastating. Written in Sarah's weakening hand, it revealed that Katie's aunt had been selling off pieces of the inherited land, claiming it was necessary for the child's care. The woman had no legal right to dispose of the A22 property. But with Tom's abandonment of his daughter, there was no one to challenge her actions. "Your father loved us more than his own life," Sarah's final letter concluded. "His leaving wasn't abandonment, it was a broken man's attempt to spare you from his pain. But you deserve to know the truth about your inheritance and about the father who never stopped loving you, even when grief made him foolish." The German shepherd rose and walked to the cabin's window, looking out toward the trail that led down to civilization. When he returned to Tom's side, he carried something in his mouth, a stick Tom hadn't seen before, carved with initials that made his heart stop. K.B. Katie Baird. Understanding crashed over Tom like a mountain avalanche. This dog hadn't found him by accident. Someone had sent him. Someone who knew about the letters, about the inheritance, about the truth Sarah had hidden for 20 years. The German shepherd had been trained to find Tom, to deliver these revelations at exactly the right moment. But who? Katie would have been too young to remember their old cabin, too young to understand Sarah's hiding places, unless Tom's hands flew to the remaining items in the bag. Beneath the letters lay a newer envelope, this one bearing recent postmark from Millerton. Inside, a single sheet of paper written in a hand he didn't recognize. "Mr. Baird, if this dog has found you, then my dying wish is being fulfilled. I am Robert Walsh, and I married your daughter Catherine 15 years ago. The consumption that took your wife has claimed me as well, but before I pass, I needed to ensure Katie learns the truth about her inheritance and about the father who never stopped loving her. I found these letters in our home's chimney, exactly where your wife said they would be. Katie doesn't know about them yet. I wanted her to be reunited with you before she learned how she'd been cheated. The land that was stolen from her is worth considerable money now that the railroad is coming through. She'll need your help to reclaim what's rightfully hers. The dog's name is Rex. He belonged to my unit during the Indian conflicts, and he's trained to track and retrieve. I've taught him your scent from an old shirt Katie saved from childhood. He'll lead you to her, just as he was meant to. Don't let pride keep you from your family again. Katie needs her father, and my son needs his grandfather. Time is running short for all of us. Come quickly." The letter was signed with a shaking hand and dated just 2 weeks prior. Robert Walsh, Katie's husband, was dead or dying, which explained why she'd been traveling with Pete's description. She was alone in the world with a young son, unaware that she'd been robbed of her rightful inheritance by the very woman who'd claimed to protect her. Tom sank into his chair, overwhelmed by the weight of revelation and regret. For 20 years, he'd convinced himself that Katie was better off without him, that his grief and guilt had made him unfit to be a father. But the truth was far more complex. Sarah had died keeping secrets meant to protect him, and those secrets had cost their daughter dearly. The German shepherd Rex placed his head on Tom's knee, brown eyes full of patient understanding. This loyal animal had been entrusted with a mission that transcended the simple delivery of letters. He'd been sent to reunite a family torn apart by misunderstanding and pride. Tom looked around his cabin, seeing it suddenly for what it truly was, not a refuge, but a prison of his own making. 20 years of self-imposed exile, while his daughter struggled alone, cheated of her birthright, and convinced that her father had abandoned her by choice. The cavalry insignia caught his attention again, and this time Tom recognized the specific markings. It had belonged to Robert Walsh's unit, the same regiment that had served alongside Tom's company during the Apache campaigns. Robert had been a good soldier, a man of honor, who'd apparently loved Katie enough to spend his dying days ensuring she learned the truth about her past. Rex whined again, moving toward the cabin door. The message was clear: time was wasting. Katie was in Millerton, possibly preparing to leave if she hadn't found the answers she sought. Every moment Tom hesitated was another moment. She remained ignorant of her stolen inheritance, and another moment his grandson grew up without family. Tom gathered the letters carefully, returning them to the leather bag along with the locket and insignia. But he left the tintype photograph on the table, Sarah holding baby Katie, both of them smiling at a camera held by a young soldier who'd thought he had all the time in the world to be a husband and father. "All right, Rex," Tom said, his voice rough with emotion and determination. "Looks like we've got a family to find." The dog's tail wagged once, a gesture of approval and readiness. Tom began. Gathering supplies for the journey down to Millerton, his movements quick and purposeful for the first time in 20 years. He was no longer a broken hermit hiding from his past. He was a father preparing to reclaim his daughter and protect his grandson from the same forces that had stolen Katie's childhood. The wooden cross on the mantel caught the light again, and Tom found himself saying a prayer for the first time since Sarah's funeral. Not for forgiveness that would come later if he earned it, but for the strength to face whatever waited below and the wisdom to help his family heal from 2 decades of separation and lies. Rex was already at the door, ready to guide Tom toward a reunion that would change everything. Tom moved through his cabin with the efficiency of a man preparing for war. 20 years of mountain living had taught him to pack light and smart, but this journey would be different from his usual supply runs. This time, he wasn't coming back to hide. Rex watched from his position near the door as Tom gathered his essentials: dried meat, hardtack, coffee, his bedroll, and the worn leather satchel that would carry the precious letters. But it was the cavalry insignia that made Tom pause, its tarnished brass surface reflecting memories he'd buried deep. He'd been barely 19 when he'd first pinned on that same style insignia, fresh-faced and eager to serve his country in the territories. The 7th Cavalry had been his brotherhood, his purpose, his pride. They'd fought Apaches across New Mexico territory, protected settlers, and maintained order in a land where law came at the barrel of a gun. Tom had been good at soldiering, maybe too good, because when his enlistment was up, his commanding officer had pressed him to re-up for another tour. Sarah had been 8 months pregnant when the orders came through for extended deployment. She'd smiled and kissed him goodbye, never telling him about the blood she'd started coughing up or the way her chest burned when she climbed the cabin steps. If he'd known, Tom forced himself to focus on the present. Self-recrimination was a luxury he couldn't afford with his daughter in danger. He strapped on his old gun belt, the leather cracked but still functional. The Colt, .45, sat heavy on his hip, a familiar weight that brought back muscle memory from decades past. He'd hoped never to wear it again, but Robert Walsh's letter had made it clear that Katie's troubles went beyond simple inheritance disputes. "Ready, boy?" Tom asked Rex, who responded by moving to the cabin door. The trail down from Tom's mountain sanctuary was treacherous under the best conditions, but Rex seemed to know every rock and fallen log. The dog moved with purpose, occasionally looking back to ensure Tom was following, but never straying from the most direct path toward civilization. As they descended, Tom found himself remembering the last time he'd made this journey in reverse. He'd been carrying Sarah's body then, wrapped in their wedding quilt, determined to bury her in the valley cemetery rather than the rocky mountain soil. Katie had been with her aunt, too young to understand why her father had come home different, why he couldn't look at her without seeing Sarah's face. The first settlement appeared after 3 hours of hard walking, a cluster of buildings that served travelers and traders moving through the mountain passes. Tom hadn't been here in over a decade, but he recognized the weathered sign, Cedar Creek Station. Rex began acting strangely as they approached, his ears pricked forward and his body tense with alertness. The dog moved to Tom's left side, positioning himself between Tom and the handful of men lounging outside the trading post. "That's far enough, stranger." The voice belonged to a lean man in a dusty black coat, his hand resting casually on the butt of his pistol. 2 companions flanked him, both wearing the hard expressions of men comfortable with violence. They weren't locals, Tom could tell by their clean-shaven faces and store-bought clothes. "Just passing through," Tom said carefully, noting how Rex's hackles had risen. "Maybe you are. Maybe you ain't." The leader stepped forward, his eyes scanning Tom with professional interest. "You wouldn't happen to be Thomas Baird, would you?" Tom's blood chilled. These men knew his name, were actively looking for him. The cavalry insignia in his pack suddenly felt like it might be connected to more than just Robert Walsh's military service. "Don't recall giving you my name," Tom replied, his hand drifting toward his gun. "Don't need you to give it. We've been asking around about a mountain man. Fits your description." The leader smiled without warmth. "Man who might have something that belongs to our employer. Don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do." The second man spoke up, revealing a slight accent Tom couldn't place. "Your son-in-law had something that didn't belong to him. When he died, it passed to his family. We're here to collect it." Understanding crashed over Tom like ice water. These men weren't just looking for Katie's inheritance, they were after whatever Robert Walsh had hidden in that leather bag. The bag Rex had been trained to deliver. "Like I said, just passing through." Tom began backing away slowly, Rex matching his movements. "Afraid we can't let you do that." The leader drew his weapon in one smooth motion. "See, we've been tracking that dog of yours for 2 weeks now. Smart animal led us right to you." Rex growled low in his throat, a warning that made the 3 men hesitate. Tom had seen enough military dogs to recognize the stance. Rex wasn't just a pet, he was trained for combat. "Easy, Rex," Tom murmured. Then louder, "What exactly do you think I have?" "Don't play stupid, old man. Walsh stole Army payroll during the Apache campaigns. Took us years to track him down, and by the time we found him, he was already dying. But he'd hidden the gold, and we know he sent that dog to fetch you." Tom's mind raced. Robert Walsh had been involved in stolen Army payroll, and these men, bounty hunters or worse, had been pursuing him. Walsh's dying letter hadn't mentioned the theft, but it explained why he'd been so desperate to reunite Tom with Katie. She was inheriting more than just land. She was inheriting her husband's dangerous legacy. "Gold's long gone," Tom said, gambling on misdirection. "Walsh spent it years ago." Maybe not." The leader raised his pistol. "But his widow might know where he hid what was left, and that dog's going to lead us right to her." Rex chose that moment to act. The German shepherd launched himself at the nearest gunman with the speed and precision of a weapon. The man's scream echoed off the mountain walls as Rex's teeth found his gun hand, sending the pistol spinning away into the dirt. Tom drew his Colt and put a bullet into the leader's shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees. The third man raised his weapon, but Tom was already moving, diving behind a water trough as the shot rang out. "Rex, down!" The dog immediately released his victim and dropped flat, well trained enough to follow commands even in combat. Tom popped up long enough to put another round into the dirt near the third man's feet, discouraging any heroic gestures. "Next one won't be a warning," Tom called out. "Ride away while you still can." The wounded men scrambled for their horses with the desperate haste of men who'd underestimated their prey. As they rode away, Tom noticed the direction they headed, straight toward the main trail to Millerton. "They're going after Katie," Tom told Rex, who was already moving toward the trail. The dog's message was clear: they had to reach Katie before the bounty hunters did. But Tom also realized something else. Rex had been trained for more than just tracking and retrieval. The dog was a warrior, and he'd been preparing for this fight long before Tom understood there would be one. As they resumed their journey toward Millerton, Tom found himself wondering what other surprises Robert Walsh had built into his final plan. The cavalry insignia wasn't just a memento, it was evidence of something that had made dangerous men willing to kill for it. Katie was in more danger than she knew, and Tom was running out of time to reach her first. The trail to Millerton stretched before them like a ribbon of dust and regret. Tom pushed the pace harder than his aging legs preferred, but the encounter with the bounty hunters had changed everything. Those men would reach the settlement before him unless he found a way to cut time from the journey. Rex seemed to understand the urgency. The German shepherd ranged ahead, scouting the path and returning to guide Tom around obstacles that would slow their progress. More than once, the dog's keen senses detected other travelers on the trail, giving Tom time to avoid potentially dangerous encounters. As they walked, Tom found himself studying his unlikely companion with new respect. Rex moved with the disciplined efficiency of a military animal, every action purposeful and controlled. Robert Walsh had trained him well, but Tom suspected the dog's education had begun long before his service with Katie's husband. "You were army before Walsh found you, weren't you, boy?" Tom murmured during a brief rest stop. Rex's ears pricked at the word army, and he sat at attention, a perfect military posture that confirmed Tom's suspicions. This dog had served with the cavalry, possibly during the same campaigns where Tom had earned his own scars and memories. The faded photograph Tom carried in his pack seemed to grow heavier with each mile. Katie, as a baby, innocent and trusting in her mother's arms, unaware that her future would be shaped by secrets and stolen gold. Tom pulled out the tintype during their next rest, studying his daughter's infant face with the desperate attention of a man trying to bridge 20 years of absence. She would be 25 now, a woman grown. Pete had mentioned she looked worn down by troubles, and Tom's heart clenched at the thought of the burdens she'd carried alone. If he'd been there when Sarah died, if he'd fought harder for custody instead of surrendering to grief and guilt, maybe Katie's life would have been different. "Can't change the past," Tom told himself firmly, but the words felt hollow. Rex whined and moved closer, pressing his warm body against Tom's leg in a gesture of comfort that seemed almost human in its understanding. The dog's brown eyes held depths of intelligence that reminded Tom of the war horses he'd known, animals that had seen too much but retained their capacity for loyalty and love. "She saved this," Tom said, showing Rex the photograph. "Katie kept something of her father all these years." The dog sniffed the tintype carefully, his tail wagging once in apparent recognition. Tom realized that Rex had probably seen this same photograph in Katie's home, had perhaps watched her looking at it during moments of loneliness or doubt. They resumed walking as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the mountain peaks. The trail grew more traveled as they approached the valley, with wagon ruts and horse tracks indicating regular traffic between the settlements. Tom found himself growing nervous about rejoining civilization, even temporarily. 20 years of solitude had left their mark. His beard was long and unkempt, his clothes patched and faded. He looked like what he was, a mountain hermit who'd forgotten how to be around people. How could he approach Katie looking like a wild man? What would his grandson think of such a grandfather? But the bounty hunter's threat pushed aside his vanity concerns. Katie's safety mattered more than his appearance, and if dangerous men were hunting for Robert Walsh's stolen gold, every moment of delay increased the risk to his family. As they crested a ridge overlooking the valley, Tom caught his first glimpse of Millerton in 2 decades. The settlement had grown considerably, with new buildings and what looked like the beginnings of a proper main street. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and Tom could make out people moving between the structures like ants in a disturbed hill. Rex began acting differently as they approached the outskirts. His movements became more cautious, his attention focused on specific scents and sounds that Tom couldn't detect. The dog was searching for something or someone. "You smell her, don't you?" Tom asked quietly. "Katie's here somewhere." Rex's tail wagged briefly, but his posture remained alert. The dog was happy to be close to his goal, but wary of the dangers that might lurk in the settlement. Those bounty hunters could already be in town, asking questions and making threats. Tom's hand instinctively checked his gun as they entered Millerton's main street. The late afternoon bustle of a frontier town surrounded them, merchants closing their shops, cowboys heading for saloons, families finishing their daily business. Tom felt exposed and out of place, but he forced himself to move with purpose. The boarding house Pete had mentioned stood at the far end of the street, a two-story building with a hand-painted sign advertising meals and clean beds. Tom's heart hammered as he approached, knowing that Katie might be just yards away behind one of those curtained windows. Rex suddenly froze, his ears pricked toward a side street. Through the crowd, Tom caught a glimpse of brown hair and green eyes, a woman walking with a young boy, both of them moving with the careful alertness of people who'd learned to watch for danger. "Katie," Tom whispered, the name catching in his throat. His daughter had grown into a beautiful woman, but Pete had been right about the wear that troubles had put on her. Even from a distance, Tom could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept one protective hand on her son's shoulder. She looked like someone who'd been running for a long time. The boy beside her was tall for his age, with sandy hair and the kind of serious expression that belonged on someone much older. Tom's grandson, a child he'd never known existed until today. The boy favored Katie in his facial structure, but carried himself with the straight-backed posture that suggested Robert Walsh had been a good influence. Rex whined softly, his whole body trembling with the desire to run to them, but the dog remained in position, waiting for Tom's command. The discipline spoke to months of training and preparation for this exact moment. Tom stood frozen at the intersection, watching his family from across the street like a ghost observing the living. Part of him wanted to approach immediately, to call Katie's name and deal with whatever consequences followed. But another part, the part that remembered her aunt's harsh words and his own failures as a father, whispered that maybe some distances were too great to cross. Rex made the decision for him. The dog gave one short, sharp bark, a sound that carried clearly across the street noise. Katie's head turned immediately toward the sound, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found the German shepherd. Her face went white with shock and recognition. Rex was supposed to be dead, buried with her husband just 2 weeks ago. Seeing him alive and healthy, standing beside a mountain man who looked vaguely familiar, must have felt like encountering a ghost. Katie grabbed her son's hand and began walking quickly toward them, her expression a mixture of confusion, hope, and fear. Tom's moment of choice had passed. The reunion he dreaded and longed for was about to begin. Katie Walsh stopped walking so abruptly that her son nearly collided with her back. Her green eyes, so much like Sarah's, fixed on Rex with an expression of disbelief that gradually shifted to recognition, then to something approaching wonder. Rex. The name escaped her lips as barely a whisper, but the German shepherd heard it. His tail began wagging with barely controlled excitement, though he remained beside Tom, awaiting permission. The boy, Tom's grandson, looked between his mother and the dog with confusion. "Mama, that looks like Papa's dog, but Rex died with Papa. You said so." Katie's gaze shifted from Rex to the weathered mountain man standing beside him, and Tom watched as understanding dawned in her features. The resemblance was still there beneath his grey beard and weathered skin, the same deep-set eyes, the same stubborn jawline she'd inherited. "Papa?" Katie's voice cracked on the word, and Tom felt 20 years of careful emotional control threaten to crumble. Tom reached into his vest pocket and withdrew the broken pocket watch that had stopped ticking the day Sarah died. Its hands pointed forever to 3:47 p.m., the moment when Tom's world had ended and his self-imposed exile began. He'd carried it every day since, a reminder of time lost and chances missed. Katie. Her name felt foreign on his tongue after so many years of silence. "I got your husband's message." Katie's composure shattered. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled between the urge to run toward him and the protective instinct that kept her hand firmly on her son's shoulder. 20 years of believing herself abandoned, warred with the impossible reality of seeing her father alive and here. "You're dead," she whispered. "Aunt Margaret said you died in the mountains. She said you couldn't bear to live after Mama passed." Tom's jaw clenched at the mention of Sarah's sister. Another lie, another manipulation designed to keep Katie under Margaret's control. "Your aunt said a lot of things that weren't true." The boy stepped forward with the bold curiosity of childhood. "Are you really my grandfather? Mama showed me the picture, but you look different." Tom knelt down to bring himself to the child's eye level, his movements careful and unthreatening. Up close, the resemblance to Robert Walsh was clear, but there were traces of the Baird family in the boy's features, the same determined chin that had marked Tom's own father. "What's your name, son?" "James Robert Walsh, but everyone calls me Jimmy." The boy studied Tom's face with the serious attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Mama said my grandfather was a soldier like Papa." "I was." Tom showed Jimmy the broken pocket watch. "This stopped working the day your grandmother died, but maybe it's time to get it fixed." Katie had composed herself enough to approach, though she maintained a careful distance. "How did you find Rex?" Robert buried him with his own hands. "Rex found me." Tom straightened slowly, his aging joints protesting. "Your husband trained him well. The dog led me to some letters your mother left for you." The color drained from Katie's face. "What letters?" Tom glanced around the busy street, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. The bounty hunters could arrive at any moment, and this reunion needed to happen somewhere safe. "We need to talk privately. There are things you need to know about your inheritance, and there are dangerous men looking for what your husband left behind." "Dangerous men?" Katie's protective instincts sharpened. "What are you talking about?" Before Tom could answer, Rex suddenly went rigid, his attention fixed on 3 riders entering the far end of the street. Even at a distance, Tom recognized the lead man's black coat and the way he sat his horse, one of the bounty hunters from Cedar Creek Station, his arm bound in a makeshift sling. "We need to go. Now." Tom's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to command under pressure. Katie followed his gaze and saw the riders. Something in their purposeful scan of the street triggered her own danger instincts. "The boarding house has a back entrance." They moved quickly but casually, Tom fighting every instinct that screamed at him to grab his family and run. 20 years of mountain living had taught him patience, but the protective fury burning in his chest demanded immediate action. The boarding house was exactly as Pete had described, a 2-story frame building that catered to travelers and temporary residents. Katie led them through a side door and up a narrow staircase to a small room that contained little more than 2 beds and a washstand. Jimmy settled on one of the beds, while Katie turned to face Tom, her expression a mixture of hope, fear, and barely contained questions. The pocket watch in Tom's hand caught the evening light, filtering through the single window, its stopped hands a reminder of time that could never be recovered. "Show me these letters," Katie said quietly. Tom reached into his pack and withdrew the bundle tied, with Sarah's blue ribbon. Katie's sharp intake of breath told him she recognized the color, remembered its significance. With trembling hands, she untied the ribbon and spread the letters on the bed beside Jimmy. As Katie read her mother's words for the first time, Tom watched 20 years of confusion and abandonment slowly transform into understanding. Sarah's explanation of her hidden illness, her protection of Tom's military service, her secret inheritance, all of it painted a picture completely different from what Katie had been told. "The land," Katie whispered, looking up from the letters with tears in her eyes. "Aunt Margaret sold most of it. She said it was worthless mountain property that nobody wanted. Your mother hid the deed in your old cabin's fireplace." "Did Margaret know about that hiding place?" Katie nodded bitterly. She knew all of Mama's secrets, said it was necessary to liquidate assets for my care and education. Tom felt rage building in his chest. 20 years of fury at his own failures, now redirected toward the woman who'd systematically robbed his daughter. How much land is left? Maybe 20 acres of the original 160. But Margaret said the railroad won't come through that area anyway, so it doesn't matter. The railroad's coming, Tom said firmly. That's why those men downstairs are willing to kill for what your husband left behind. The remaining land is worth a fortune, and Margaret's been selling it piece by piece to line her own pockets. Jimmy had been listening intently, his young mind processing the adult complications with remarkable clarity. Does this mean we don't have to keep running, Mama? The question revealed more than Katie might have intended. She and Jimmy had been traveling, possibly fleeing from something or someone. The bounty hunter's arrival suggested their troubles were catching up. Running from what? Tom asked gently. Katie's composure cracked again. Robert left debts. Bad men who want money he didn't have. They said if I couldn't pay, they'd take Jimmy as compensation for what Robert owed. Tom's blood turned to ice. The stolen army payroll was one thing, but threatening a child crossed lines that demanded lethal response. The broken pocket watch in his hand seemed to tick once, as if time itself was finally ready to move forward. The sound of heavy boots on the boarding house stairs made Rex's ears prick forward in warning. Tom moved to the window and peered through the edge of the curtain, his worst fears confirmed by the sight of armed men questioning the desk clerk below. Katie gathered the letters quickly, her movements sharp with practiced efficiency. "There's a back stairway," she whispered. "Mrs. Henderson lets me use it when I need to avoid certain visitors." Jimmy was already moving toward a small cloth bundle on the dresser, his and his mother's worldly possessions packed for quick departure. The boy had learned to live, ready to run, and the sight broke Tom's heart while filling him with pride at his grandson's resilience. "Wait," Tom said quietly, pulling a small wooden toy horse from his pack. He'd found it among Robert Walsh's belongings in the leather bag, carved with the careful attention of a father making something special for his son. "This belonged to your papa, didn't it?" Jimmy's eyes widened as he recognized the toy. "Papa made it for my 6th birthday. I thought it was lost when we had to leave so quickly." Tom handed the wooden horse to his grandson, watching as the boy clutched it against his chest like a talisman. The toy represented more than childhood comfort. It was a tangible connection to the father Jimmy had lost and the grandfather he was just beginning to know. "Your papa loved you very much," Tom said softly. "He spent his last days making sure you'd be safe." Katie wiped her eyes and shouldered her pack. "The men downstairs, they're the ones Robert owed money to. Different men. Same problem." Tom checked his gun while keeping his voice low. "Your husband was involved in something that happened years ago during the Indian campaigns. These bounty hunters want what they think he left behind." "What did he leave behind?" Katie's question carried the weight of a woman who'd been living with half-truths for too long. Tom hesitated, then decided she deserved honesty. "Stolen army payroll. Gold that disappeared during an Apache raid 15 years ago. Robert was part of the detail that lost it, but these men think he kept some for himself." Katie's face went white. "Robert never mentioned he was protecting you. Same way your mother protected me by not telling me how sick she was." Tom moved toward the back stairs. "But those men downstairs won't care about protection. They'll hurt Jimmy to get answers you don't have." The three of them slipped down the narrow back stairway, Rex moving silently ahead to scout their path. The German shepherd had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect danger, his military training serving them well in their escape. As they reached the rear exit, Tom caught sight of movement through the kitchen window. More men were circling the building, cutting off obvious escape routes. These bounty hunters had learned from their earlier encounter they weren't taking chances this time. Stable, Katy whispered, pointing toward a small structure behind the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson keeps her horses there. They made their way across the darkening yard, using outbuildings and hanging laundry as cover. Jimmy clutched his wooden horse while staying close to his mother, his young face set in lines too serious for his age. Inside the stable, Katy led them to a horse she obviously knew well, a sturdy mare that nickered softly at her approach. This is Buttercup. Mrs. Henderson lets me exercise her in exchange for stable work. Tom studied the mare with a critical eye. She was strong, enough to carry 2 riders, but 3 adults and a child would be pushing her limits. How far to the nearest settlement? 20 miles to Cedar Falls, but there's an old mining camp about 8 miles north. Abandoned now, but the buildings are still standing. Rex suddenly went rigid, his attention fixed on the stable's main entrance. Tom heard it too, voices approaching, men coordinating a search pattern. The bounty hunters had discovered their escape route. "Can you ride bareback?" Tom asked Katy quickly. "Yes, but Jimmy. I'll take Jimmy." Tom was already helping his grandson onto the mare's back. "You ride behind me? I'll hold the boy." Katy swung up behind Tom with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent considerable time on horseback. The arrangement put them in close contact for the first time in 20 years, and Tom caught the faint scent of lavender soap, the same soap Sarah had favored. Rex padded ahead as they led the mare out through the stable's back. Entrance. The dog's senses alert for any sign of their pursuers. The sun had nearly set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Tom of countless sunsets he'd watched alone on his mountain. "Grandpa?" Jimmy's voice was barely a whisper. "Are the bad men going to hurt Mama?" Tom tightened his protective grip on his grandson. "Not while I'm breathing, son." They reached the edge of Millerton without detection, but Tom knew their reprieve was temporary. The bounty hunters had horses, local knowledge, and the kind of determination that came from pursuing a substantial reward. The chase would begin as soon as their absence was discovered. As they rode through the gathering dusk toward the abandoned mining camp, Tom found himself studying the way Katy held herself straight-backed and alert, ready for whatever came next. She'd inherited more than her mother's eyes. She'd gotten Sarah's quiet strength and resilience. Jimmy leaned back against Tom's chest, the wooden horse clutched in his small hands. "Papa used to tell me stories about my grandpa, the soldier. He said you were the bravest man he ever knew." Tom's throat tightened. Robert Walsh had spoken well of a man he'd never met, building a bridge of respect across the years of separation. "Your papa was a good man. He protected your mama and tried to protect you, too." "Will you tell me about Grandma Sarah?" Jimmy asked. Tom looked back at Katy, seeking permission. Her slight nod told him that Jimmy knew about his grandmother's death, but perhaps not the full story of their family's tragedy. "She was the most beautiful woman in the territory," Tom began, his voice carrying across the darkening landscape. "Had green eyes just like your mama's, and she could make anyone smile even on the worst days." As they rode toward uncertain shelter, Tom found himself telling stories he'd kept locked away for 20 years. Stories of Sarah's laughter, her terrible cooking when they were first married, the way she'd sung lullabies that could calm any crying baby. For the first time since Sarah's death, Tom felt like he was truly living again instead of just surviving. His family needed him, and he had a chance to be the father and grandfather he should have been all along. The wooden horse in Jimmy's hands caught the last rays of sunlight, its carved surface smooth from countless hours of loving play. Robert Walsh's final gift to his son had become a symbol of hope, proof that love could survive across time and distance, and that broken families could heal if given the chance. The abandoned mining camp squatted in a moonlit clearing like the bones of a forgotten dream. Weathered buildings clustered around a central shaft house, their broken windows staring blindly at the star-scattered sky. Tom guided Buttercup toward the most intact structure, a bunkhouse that still had most of its roof. Inside, Katy lit a small oil lamp she'd brought from the boarding house, while Tom and Jimmy explored their temporary shelter. The bunkhouse had been stripped of most useful items, but the stone fireplace was intact and would provide warmth without revealing their location. Rex positioned himself near the door, alert for any sounds from outside. The German shepherd had been unusually restless since leaving Millerton, as if he sensed something beyond the obvious danger of their pursuers. "Papa, look at this." Jimmy had discovered something wedged behind one of the remaining wallboards, a piece of cloth that had been deliberately hidden. Tom helped the boy work it free, revealing a small canvas pouch tied with leather strings. Katie looked up from arranging their meager supplies. "What did you find?" Tom examined the pouch carefully. It was weather-stained, but had been wrapped in oiled leather to protect its contents. The knots in the strings were tied in a specific pattern, a military technique for marking important packages. "This was hidden on purpose," Tom said, working the knots loose. "Someone wanted to make sure only the right person would find it." Inside the pouch was a folded piece of paper covered with marks that initially appeared to be random scratches. But as Tom studied them by lamplight, patterns emerged. The marks formed a crude map showing geographical features he recognized: Devil's Canyon, Copper Creek, the distinctive rock formation locals called Eagle's Nest. "It's a map," Katie said, looking over his shoulder. "But a map to what?" Tom's blood ran cold as he recognized one particular marking. A small X, positioned near a creek bed that ran through property that had once belonged to Sarah's family land that should have been Katie's inheritance. "The stolen army payroll," he whispered. "Robert didn't spend it, he buried it." Katie grabbed the map with trembling hands. "Where? Show me where." Tom pointed to the X, his mind racing through implications. "Here, on what should be your land." "But Katie, if Margaret sold that particular section, she didn't." Katie's voice was sharp with sudden understanding. "That's the one piece she could never sell because it's swampland, worthless for farming or building. Or, so she said." Rex whined and moved to the window, his hackles rising. In the distance, Tom could hear what the dog's superior senses had already detected: hoofbeats approaching through the night. "They found us," Katie said, extinguishing the lamp immediately. Tom gathered the map and other papers, his mind working frantically. The bounty hunter's arrival might be bad luck, or it might be something worse. How had they tracked them so quickly and accurately to an abandoned camp miles from town? "Jimmy, stay close to your mother," Tom ordered, moving to peer out through a gap in the wallboards. "Katie, is there another way out of here? The mine shaft has tunnels, but they're old and dangerous." 3 riders emerged from the tree line, moving with the careful precision of men who knew exactly where they were going. Tom's stomach dropped as he recognized not just the lead bounty hunter, but the horse he rode, a distinctive paint mare that belonged to Mrs. Henderson's stable. "They have our horse," Tom realized. "They followed our trail directly here." But as the riders drew closer, Tom noticed something that made his blood freeze. The lead man carried a lantern that he swung in a deliberate pattern. 3 short flashes, 2 long ones. A signal. Rex began growling low in his throat, but his attention wasn't focused on the approaching riders. The dog was looking toward the back of the bunkhouse, where shadows moved among the ruined buildings. Tom grabbed his rifle and checked the load. "We're surrounded. This wasn't tracking, it was a trap." Katie's face went pale in the moonlight. "How could they know we'd come here?" Before Tom could answer, a voice called out from the darkness, a voice that made Katie gasp in recognition. "Catherine? Catherine Walsh? I know you're in there, dear." The voice belonged to a woman, cultured and carrying the false sweetness of someone accustomed to manipulation. Tom saw Katie's expression change from fear to fury as she recognized the speaker. "Aunt Margaret," Katie whispered. "She's here." Tom's understanding of their situation shifted dramatically. This wasn't just about bounty hunters pursuing stolen army gold. Margaret had been involved from the beginning, possibly orchestrating everything to maintain control over Katie's inheritance. "Come out, dear," Margaret's voice continued. "And bring that map. Your husband was foolish enough to hide. We know you have it now." Tom's mind raced through the implications. Margaret had known about the map's existence, had probably known about the buried payroll all along. The bounty hunters weren't just random criminals, they were working with Katie's aunt to recover the gold and eliminate any witnesses to their conspiracy. "She's been stealing from me for 20 years, Katie said, her voice shaking with rage. "And now she's trying to steal the last thing Robert left for Jimmy." Tom looked at the map again, seeing it with new understanding. The X marking the burial site wasn't on worthless swampland, it was on the most valuable piece of the original inheritance, positioned exactly where the coming railroad would need to build a crucial bridge across the creek. Margaret had kept that land because she knew its true worth, and she'd been waiting for the right moment to claim the hidden treasure as well. Rex moved to stand between Jimmy and the door, his military training evident in the protective stance. The dog understood that the real enemy wasn't the men outside, it was the woman whose voice carried the poison of decades of lies and theft. "Grandpa?" Jimmy clutched his wooden horse tightly. "Is the bad lady going to hurt us?" Tom checked his weapons and looked at his family. The daughter he'd failed to protect 20 years ago, and the grandson who deserved better than a legacy of greed and betrayal. "Not if I have anything to say about it, son." Tom's voice carried the cold certainty of a man who'd finally found something worth fighting for. "Your Aunt Margaret made one big mistake." "What's that?" Katie asked. "She brought a family fight to a soldier." Tom moved toward the window, his weathered hands steady on his rifle. "And this soldier's been waiting 20 years to settle accounts." The map in Katie's hands represented more than buried gold. It was the key to reclaiming everything that had been stolen from his family. But first, they had to survive the night and the enemies who had no intention of leaving witnesses to their crimes. Tom's hands moved with the practiced efficiency of a man preparing for his last stand. From his pack, he withdrew his old service revolver, a Colt .45, that had seen action in a dozen skirmishes across the Apache territories. The .5 weight felt familiar in his palm, muscle memory overriding 20 years of peaceful mountain living. "Katie, can you shoot?" Tom asked quietly, offering her Robert's smaller pistol from the leather bag. "Robert taught me." She checked the weapon with competent movements. "But I've never shot at people. Let's hope you don't have to." Tom positioned himself at the main window while Katie took the side wall. "Jimmy, I need you to stay low and keep Rex close. Can you do that for me?" His grandson nodded solemnly, one small hand gripping the wooden horse while the other rested on Rex's neck. The German shepherd had positioned himself as a living shield between the boy and any potential danger, his training evident in every alert line of his body. Outside, Margaret's voice continued its false sweetness. "Catherine, dear, you're making this much more difficult than necessary. All we want is the map. Surely that's a fair trade for young James's safety." Tom felt rage building in his chest, the same cold fury that had once made him deadly effective in combat. Threatening a child crossed every line of decency, and Margaret's casual mention of Jimmy's danger revealed the true depths of her corruption. 20 years, Tom muttered, checking his rifle's action. 20 years she's been stealing from my family. Katie looked at him with eyes that held both fear and fierce determination. "She told everyone you were dead, made me believe I was completely alone in the world. When Robert proposed, she encouraged the marriage because she said, I needed a man to take care of me. And when Robert died, she wanted me to come back, bring Jimmy to live with her. Said it was for the boy's own good." Katie's voice hardened. "Now I understand why. She needed to control Jimmy, to control the inheritance." Tom studied their defensive position with tactical eyes. The bunkhouse had 2 windows and 1 door, adequate fields of fire but limited escape routes. The stone fireplace would provide some protection from rifle fire, and the thick log walls would stop most pistol rounds. But they were outnumbered and surrounded, facing enemies who had no qualms about killing a child to achieve their goals. Rex suddenly tensed, his attention focused on sounds only he could detect. Tom listened carefully and caught the faint creak of old floorboards. Someone was moving through the ruined buildings, trying to get closer under cover of Margaret's distraction. "They're positioning for an assault," Tom whispered. "Professional tactics. These aren't just bounty hunters, they're hired killers." Katie's knuckles were white where she gripped her pistol. "How many do you think?" "At least 6, maybe more." Tom made quick calculations based on the movement patterns he'd observed. Margaret brought enough men to handle serious resistance. The wooden horse in Jimmy's hands caught moonlight through the window, its carved surface smooth from countless hours of loving attention. Robert Walsh had made it with his own hands, carving details that spoke of a father's devotion. Tom found himself thinking about the man who'd trained Rex, who'd hidden the map, who'd spent his dying days ensuring his family would have resources to escape their enemies. "Your husband was a good soldier," Tom told Katie quietly. "He planned for this." "Planned for what?" Tom pointed to Rex, whose alert posture and positioning revealed tactical awareness beyond normal dog training. "Rex isn't just a pet, he's a weapon Robert prepared for exactly this situation. Watch his eyes, he's tracking movement patterns, identifying threats, calculating fields of fire." As if responding to his name, Rex looked directly at Tom and gave one soft whine. The sound carried specific meaning, a warning that the final assault was imminent. Margaret's voice shifted, losing its false sweetness. "Catherine, my patience is exhausted. You have 1 minute to come out with that map or we'll burn the building down around you." Tom felt the familiar calm that had always preceded combat. Time seemed to slow, his senses sharpening as adrenaline flooded his system. He'd been preparing for this fight his entire life without knowing it, 20 years of guilt and self-recrimination crystallizing into pure, protective fury. "Katie, listen to me carefully." Tom's voice carried the authority of command. "When this starts, you stay with Jimmy no matter what happens. Rex will protect you both, but you need to be ready to move if I give the signal. You'll know." Tom checked his ammunition count and made final adjustments to his position. "If something happens to me, take the map and get to the nearest town with a telegraph. Send word to Fort Collins, ask for Colonel Morrison. Tell him Thomas Baird's daughter needs help with stolen army payroll." Katie's eyes widened. "You know someone who can help?" "Morrison was my commanding officer during the Apache campaigns. If anyone can sort out this mess legally, it's him." Tom looked at his grandson, memorizing the boy's face in case this was their last conversation. "Jimmy, your papa trained Rex to protect you. Trust the dog, he'll get you and your mama to safety if things go bad." The boy nodded gravely, his small hand still clutching the carved horse. "Will you come with us, Grandpa?" Tom's throat tightened. "I'm going to try, son. But if I can't, you remember that your grandpa loved you from the first moment he knew you existed." Outside, the sound of movement had ceased the ominous quiet that preceded coordinated action. Tom could feel his enemies taking their final positions, preparing to assault the bunkhouse from multiple directions. Margaret had probably promised them substantial rewards for recovering the map and eliminating witnesses. Rex rose to his feet, every muscle coiled for action. The German shepherd looked directly at Tom with an expression that seemed almost human in its understanding. The dog was asking for permission to begin the fight. "Not yet, boy," Tom whispered. "Let them think they have the advantage." A burning arrow arced through the darkness and embedded itself in the bunkhouse roof. Within seconds, 2 more followed, their flames catching on the dry wooden shingles. Margaret had made good on her threat. They were going to burn out Tom's family like animals from a den. "The mine shaft?" Katie said urgently. "There's a tunnel that leads to the old equipment shed." Tom shook his head. "They'll be watching that exit. We go out fighting, or we don't go out at all." Another fire arrow struck the wall near Jimmy's position, and Tom made his decision. His family had spent 20 years running from Margaret's manipulations and threats. Tonight, the running stopped. Tom looked at his daughter, Sarah's daughter, and saw the same quiet courage that had sustained his wife through her final illness. Katie had inherited more than her. Mother's eyes, she'd gotten the inner strength that made the Baird women formidable when their families were threatened. "Ready?" Tom asked. Katie nodded, raising her pistol with steady hands. "Ready." Rex's tail wagged once, a gesture of approval and readiness. The loyal dog understood that the time for hiding was over. The final battle for the Baird family's freedom was about to begin. Smoke began seeping through the roof as the flames took hold, adding urgency to their desperate situation. Tom took one last look at the map that had started everything, then folded it carefully and handed it to Katie. "Whatever happens next," he said, "that land belongs to Jimmy. Don't let anyone steal his birthright again." The sound of boots on gravel announced their enemy's final approach. Tom raised his rifle and prepared to fight for the family he'd thought he'd lost forever. The first gunshot shattered the night silence like breaking glass. Tom saw muzzle flash from behind the old water tower and returned fire instantly, his bullet sparking off metal with a sharp ring. 20 years melted away as combat instincts took over, transforming the mountain hermit back into the soldier he'd always been beneath the grief and guilt. "Stay down!" Tom barked to Katie as bullets splintered the window frame where his head had been moments before. Rex had been waiting for Tom's signal whistle, a sharp, piercing note that cut through the gunfire. The German shepherd exploded into action, flowing through the darkness like a four-legged shadow toward the equipment shed where two of Margaret's hired guns had taken position. The sound of a man's scream confirmed that Rex had found his first target. Tom allowed himself a grim smile as he worked the lever action on his rifle, chambering another round. Robert Walsh had trained the dog well for exactly this kind of fight. "Catherine!" Margaret's voice carried clearly across the compound, sharp with anger now that her careful plan was unraveling. "You're only making this harder on yourself." Tom spotted movement near the minehead and put a bullet close enough to send the shooter diving for better cover. The old mining camp was working to their advantage, plenty of obstacles and hiding places that broke up coordinated assaults. Katie fired twice at shadows moving between buildings, her shots carefully aimed despite her inexperience with combat. "How long can we hold them off?" "As long as we have ammunition." Tom ejected a spent shell and reloaded smoothly. "But they'll try to rush us when the roof catches fully." The flames above them were spreading faster now, smoke beginning to fill the upper portions of the bunkhouse. Jimmy crouched behind the stone fireplace with his wooden horse clutched tightly, his young face set with the kind of courage that reminded Tom powerfully of Sarah during her final illness. A rifle cracked from a new position, and Tom felt the bullet tug at his sleeve as he rolled away. From the window. These weren't random bounty hunters, they moved with military precision, coordinating their fire to pin down the defenders while others maneuvered for better positions. Rex appeared at the side window, his muzzle dark with blood that wasn't his own. The dog's tactical assessment was clear. In his alert posture, 2 enemies eliminated, but more were closing in from the blind side of the building. "Good boy," Tom whispered, then louder. "Katie, they're coming around the back." She swung her pistol toward the rear window just as a shadow appeared in the frame. Her shot took the man's center mass, dropping him with a grunt of pain and surprise. Katie's face went pale at what she'd done, but her hands remained steady on her weapon. The sound of running feet on the wooden porch announced the main assault. Tom put 3 quick rounds through the door, rewarded by curses and the sound of men diving for cover. But the distraction cost him a shooter he hadn't spotted. Put a bullet through the side wall that passed close enough to fan his cheek. Smoke was getting thicker now, forcing them to crouch low to breathe. The roof fire had reached the point where collapse was becoming a real possibility. Margaret's strategy was simple and effective: burn them out or cook them alive. "Grandpa," Jimmy's voice was tight with fear but not panic. "The bad lady is coming." Tom looked toward the main window and saw Margaret striding across the compound with the confidence of someone who believed victory was assured. She was flanked by 2 gunmen, both carrying rifles at ready position. Behind them, Tom could see at least 3 more men positioned to cut off any escape routes. "Catherine, dear, this has gone quite far enough," Margaret called out as she approached the burning building. "Young James is breathing smoke, and that roof won't hold much longer. Surely his life is worth more than a piece of paper." Tom watched his daughter's face as she listened to the woman who'd stolen her childhood, her inheritance, and 20 years of her life. Katie's green eyes, so much like Sarah's, hardened with a resolve that made Tom proud. "You're right, Aunt Margaret," Katie called back, her voice carrying clearly through the smoke. "Jimmy's life is worth everything to me. That's why I'm not going to let you take him." Katie's shot punched through the doorframe, close enough to make Margaret stumble backward with a shriek of rage and fear. The cultured facade finally cracked completely, revealing the vicious greed beneath. "Kill them all!" Margaret screamed. "I want that map, and I want them dead." The coordinated assault began immediately. Rifles opened up from 3 directions, filling the bunkhouse with flying splinters and the whine of ricochets. Tom grabbed Jimmy and pulled him deeper behind the fireplace as chunks of stone flew from bullet impacts. Rex launched himself through the side window with a snarl that carried across the gunfire. Tom heard shouts and curses as the German shepherd tore into their attackers with trained precision. The dog was buying them precious seconds, but a terrible risk to himself. "We have to move," Tom shouted over the noise. "The roof's going to come down." Katie looked toward the rear of the building, where flames were already licking through the ceiling boards. "The mine shaft, it's our only chance." Tom knew she was right, but leaving their defensive position would expose them to the remaining shooters. It was a choice between certain death by fire or probable death by bullets. The decision was made for them when a section of burning roof collapsed near the doorway, sending sparks cascading across their limited supplies. The heat was becoming unbearable, and Jimmy had started coughing from the thickening smoke. "Rex!" Tom whistled sharply, calling the dog back from his attack. The German shepherd appeared at the window, blood streaking his dark fur, but his eyes bright with combat. Readiness. Rex had eliminated at least 2 more of their enemies, but Margaret still had enough guns to finish the job. "On my signal, we run for the mine shaft," Tom told Katie. "Stay low, stay together, and don't stop for anything." Katie nodded, checking her ammunition count one final time. "What about you?" Tom looked at his rifle, then at his family. "I'll be right behind you. But if something happens—" "Nothing's going to happen." Katie's voice carried absolute conviction. "We're all getting out of here together." Through the smoke and flame, Tom heard Margaret giving orders to her remaining men. They were positioning for a final assault, confident that the fire would drive their prey into the open where they could be cut down easily. Tom pulled out his signal whistle, the same instrument that had coordinated cavalry charges across hostile territory 20 years ago. Rex's ears pricked at the sight of it, understanding what was coming next. "Ready?" Tom asked his family. Jimmy clutched his wooden horse and nodded bravely. Katie raised her pistol with steady hands. Rex coiled his muscles for explosive action. Tom put the whistle to his lips and blew 3 sharp blasts, the cavalry signal for charge. The whistle's piercing call triggered chaos. Rex burst from the window like a cannonball, slamming into the nearest gunman with enough force to knock him sprawling. Tom followed immediately, his rifle spitting fire as he laid down, covering shots for his family's escape. Katie ran bent low, Jimmy clutched protectively against her chest, both of them coughing from the smoke that billowed out of the collapsing bunkhouse. The family Bible she'd grabbed from their supplies was pressed against her body like armor, its worn leather cover offering symbolic protection as bullets whined overhead. Tom's first shot took down the rifleman positioned near the mine head, clearing their path to the shaft entrance. His second shot went wide as he stumbled over debris, but it forced Margaret's remaining men to dive for cover instead of maintaining their firing positions. "The shaft!" Katie shouted, pointing toward the dark opening 20 yards ahead. Rex had engaged 2 gunmen simultaneously, his military training evident in the way he attacked high-value targets while staying mobile enough to avoid return fire. One man screamed as the dog's teeth found his gun arm. The other was trying to get a clear shot without hitting his partner. Tom put a bullet into the second man's shoulder, spinning him around and ending the threat to Rex. The German Shepherd immediately released his first victim and bounded toward the mine entrance, herding the family towards safety like a four-legged guardian angel. Margaret appeared from behind the water tower, her face twisted with rage as she saw her carefully planned ambush falling apart. She raised a small pistol with shaking hands, aiming directly at Katie's back. "If I can't have the inheritance, no one can," Margaret screamed. Tom saw the danger and threw himself sideways, tackling Katie and Jimmy to the ground as Margaret's shot cracked through the air where they'd been standing. All three of them rolled behind a rusted mining cart just as more bullets sparked off the metal wheels. "Stay down," Tom commanded, then rose just high enough to return fire. His shot caught Margaret in the shoulder, sending her stumbling backward with a cry of pain and disbelief. For 20 years, she'd manipulated and stolen without consequence. Facing actual resistance seemed to have broken something fundamental in her worldview. "You can't do this to me," Margaret shrieked, clutching her wounded arm. "That inheritance is mine. I earned it caring for that ungrateful child." Katie's face hardened with 20 years of suppressed fury. "You stole everything from me. My land, my childhood, my father." The family Bible pressed against Katie's chest had absorbed the impact of their fall, its thick pages slightly crumpled but intact. The book had been Sarah's, carried from church services, in the old days when the Baird family was whole and happy. Now it served as protection for the family's reunion. Rex bounded to their position, blood on his muzzle but his eyes bright with combat readiness. The dog had eliminated or disabled most of Margaret's hired guns, leaving only a handful of enemies still capable of fighting. "How many left?" Tom asked the dog quietly. Rex looked toward the remaining buildings and gave 2 short barks, his way of reporting enemy count. 2 gunmen were still active, but they were pinned down and reluctant to expose themselves to the German Shepherd's devastating attacks. Tom checked his ammunition and found himself down to 3 rounds in the rifle and 6 in his pistol. Not enough for a prolonged firefight, but probably sufficient to finish what they'd started. "Katie, when I give the word, run for the mine shaft. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything." "What about you?" "Rex and I are going to end this." Tom looked at his grandson, who was still clutching the wooden horse with one hand while holding tightly to his mother with the other. "Jimmy, you take care of your mama, understand?" "Yes, sir." Jimmy's voice was steady despite everything he'd witnessed. "But Grandpa, you promised you'd come with us." Tom's throat tightened. "I'm going to try, son, but if I can't, you remember what I told you about your papa training Rex to protect you. The dog will get you and your mama to safety." A rifle shot cracked from the equipment shed, the bullet passing close enough to shower them with wood splinters from the mining cart. The remaining gunmen were getting desperate, taking increasingly risky shots to try to finish the fight. Margaret had managed to reload her pistol despite her wounded shoulder. She was moving toward better cover, clearly planning one final attempt to claim the inheritance map that represented her. Life's work of theft and manipulation. Tom made his decision. "Now! Run!" Katie sprinted toward the mine shaft with Jimmy in her arms. The family Bible clutched protectively against them both. Rex bounded alongside them, ready to intercept any threats to his charges. Tom rose from cover and advanced toward Margaret's position, his rifle ready. The old woman saw him coming and raised her pistol with shaking hands, her face a mask of hatred and greed. "You should have stayed dead in those mountains," Margaret snarled. "Maybe," Tom replied calmly. "But then my family would still be at your mercy." Her shot went wide as her wounded shoulder threw off her aim. Tom's return fire was precise and final, ending 20 years of Margaret's reign of theft and manipulation with the same definitive authority he'd once brought to Apache raiders. The remaining gunmen, seeing their employer down and their mission failed, chose discretion over valor. Tom watched them disappear into the darkness. On horseback, leaving behind their wounded and dead rather than continue a fight they couldn't win. Rex returned from escorting Katie and Jimmy to the mine entrance, his tail wagging once in confirmation that they were safe. The German shepherd looked at Tom with eyes that seemed to hold approval. The mission Robert Walsh had trained him for was nearly complete. Tom walked slowly toward the mine shaft, his legs shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. 20 years of guilt and self-imposed exile had ended in the space of a few violent minutes. His family was safe, Margaret's threat was eliminated, and the inheritance map was finally in the right hands. At the mine entrance, Katie emerged from the shadows, with Jimmy still in her arms. Both of them were covered in dust and smoke, but their eyes shone with something Tom hadn't seen in decades: hope. "Is it over?" Katie asked quietly. Tom looked back at the burning bunkhouse, the scattered bodies of Margaret's hired killers, and the place where his sister-in-law's body lay still. "It's over." Jimmy held up his wooden horse, its carved surface scratched but intact. "Papa's horse kept me safe, just like you promised." Tom knelt down and pulled his grandson into his arms, feeling the boy's small heart beating against his chest. "Your papa was a smart man. He knew this day might come, and he made sure you'd have everything you needed to survive it." The family Bible in Katie's hands caught moonlight, its worn cover bearing the scars of their escape. Like the wooden horse, it had protected what mattered most, not just from bullets, but from 20 years of separation and lies. Tom Baird was finally ready to go home with his family. 3 months later, Tom Baird stood on the front porch of a new cabin, watching his grandson carve a piece of pine with the same careful attention Robert Walsh had once shown. The morning sun painted the valley in shades of gold and green, a far gentler landscape than the harsh mountains where Tom had spent his exile. Jimmy looked up from his carving, wood shavings scattered around his boots like tiny prayers answered. "It's almost finished, Grandpa." Tom settled into the rocking chair. Katie had insisted on building for him, marveling at how domestic comfort felt after 20 years of Spartan mountain living. "What are you making there, son?" "A cross, like the one Mama showed me in the old cabin." Jimmy held up his work, a small wooden cross, carved with the same loving attention Sarah had given to her original gift. "I want to put it on Grandma's grave when we visit next week." The words hit Tom with unexpected emotion. Katie had been taking Jimmy to visit Sarah's burial site every few weeks, teaching the boy about the grandmother he'd never known. It was part of the healing that had begun the night they'd escaped Margaret's final trap. Colonel Morrison had been as good as Tom's word. The telegram to Fort Collins had brought federal marshals within days, men who'd sorted through the decades of theft and conspiracy with methodical efficiency. Margaret's surviving accomplices had been arrested, the stolen army payroll recovered from its hiding place on Katie's reclaimed land, and most importantly, the fraudulent sale of Sarah's inheritance had been legally reversed. Katie appeared in the cabin's doorway, flour on her hands from the morning's baking. She'd inherited more than her mother's eyes. She'd gotten Sarah's gift for making any place feel like home. "Breakfast is ready. And Papa, you have a letter from the railroad company." Tom took the envelope with hands that still trembled slightly when he thought about how close he'd come to losing everything that mattered. The railroad's offer for easement rights across their reclaimed land was generous enough to secure Jimmy's future for generations, but more important was the knowledge that it came to them honestly. "Good news?" Katie asked, reading his expression. "Better than good." Tom folded the letter carefully. "Jimmy's going to be able to attend any school he wants, maybe even that university back east you mentioned." Rex emerged from beneath the porch, where he'd been napping in the morning shade. The German shepherd had adapted to domestic life with remarkable ease, though Tom sometimes caught the dog scanning the horizon with the alertness of a soldier who never quite stopped standing guard. Jimmy finished his cross and held it up to catch the sunlight. The boy had inherited his father's skill with carving, but there was something distinctly Baird about the way he approached the work, patient, methodical, and driven by love rather than mere craftsmanship. Tell me again about Grandma Sarah, Jimmy requested, settling beside Tom's chair with the carved cross cradled in his small hands. Tom found himself smiling as memories flowed more easily now, the pain of loss gradually replaced by the warmth of remembrance. She could make anyone laugh, even during the hardest times. When I was away with the cavalry, she'd write letters that made me homesick and proud at the same time. Like Mama's letters to you? Better, Katie said, joining them on the porch with 3 cups of coffee, real coffee, not the chicory substitute Tom had grown accustomed to in the mountains. Mama's letters were full of love and wisdom. Mine are just full of worry about whether you're eating enough. Tom laughed, a sound that had become more frequent as the weeks passed. Your mother worried about me eating properly too. Some things don't change between generations. The broken pocket watch that had stopped on the day Sarah died now ticked steadily in Tom's vest pocket. A clockmaker in the nearest town had repaired it with reverent care after learning its significance, refusing payment for what he called a privilege to restore time itself. Katie studied the new cross Jimmy had carved, comparing it to the original that now sat on. Their mantle, Sarah's cross, worn smooth by Tom's fingers during 20 years of mountain solitude. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Grandma would be proud. Do you think she knows? Jimmy asked, with the earnest curiosity of childhood. About us finding Grandpa and getting our land back. Tom felt tears prick his eyes, but they were good tears now, tears of gratitude rather than grief. I think she knew this would happen someday. Your grandma was smart about the important things. She hid those letters knowing that someday you'd need to know the truth. Rex rose and padded over to Jimmy, resting his head on the boy's knee with the patient affection of a companion who'd found his permanent home. The dog had served his mission faithfully, reuniting a broken family and protecting them through their darkest hour. Now he could simply be what Robert Walsh had always intended, a loyal friend and guardian. Will you help me plant flowers on Grandma's grave? Jimmy asked Tom. Mama says she liked wildflowers. I'd be honored. Tom reached over and ruffled his grandson's hair. We'll plant enough flowers to make that whole hillside beautiful. Katie disappeared into the cabin and returned with a thick, leather-bound book, a new family Bible, to replace the one that had taken bullets meant for, to her. She'd been recording their family history in its pages, documenting Jimmy's achievements, preserving stories of Sarah and Robert, and chronicling Tom's return from exile. I've been thinking, Katie said, settling into her own chair, about names for the new baby. Tom nearly dropped his coffee cup. New baby? Katie's smile was radiant with the same joy Sarah had shown when she'd told him about Katie's coming arrival. I found out last week. Jimmy's going to be a big brother come spring. Jimmy whooped with delight and jumped up to hug his mother, his carved cross held carefully away from her stomach. Can we name him Robert if it's a boy? After Papa, Robert Thomas. Walsh, Katie said, looking at Tom with eyes that held 20 years of forgiveness. For the 2 men who loved us most. Tom felt the last pieces of his broken heart settling back into place. The name honored both Jimmy's father and the grandfather who'd finally found his way home. It represented continuity, healing, and hope for the future. As the morning sun climbed higher over their reclaimed valley, Tom watched his family plan for a future he'd thought was lost forever. The wooden cross in Jimmy's hands caught the light, reflecting the same gentle radiance that had drawn Tom to Sarah decades ago. Rex stretched out across the porch with a contented sigh, finally able to rest after completing the mission that had defined his purpose. The dog's brown eyes held the satisfaction of duty fulfilled and family protected. Tom pulled out his repaired pocket watch and checked the time, 8:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning in September. 20 years and 3 months after time had stopped for the Baird family. But now the watch ticked steadily forward, marking moments of joy instead of measuring loss. Ready for breakfast? Katie asked, rising with the graceful movements of early pregnancy. More than ready, Tom replied, following his daughter and grandson into the cabin that rang with laughter and the sounds of a family finally whole again. The wooden cross Jimmy had carved sat on the porch railing, catching morning light like a beacon of hope. It would join Sarah's cross on her grave, but more importantly, it would mark the beginning of a new chapter in the Baird family story, one written in love, forgiveness, and the quiet strength that passes from one generation to the next. Outside, the reclaimed land stretched toward horizons bright with possibility, while inside, 3 generations of Bairds planned for a future built on truth instead of lies, love instead of manipulation, and the unshakable foundation of family bonds that had survived 20 years of separation. Tom Baird was finally home.